General Marcus Chen stood in the center of the crystalline execution chamber, his hands bound behind his back with energy shackles that hummed with alien technology. The Galactic Empire's highest court had assembled to witness what they called justice, the execution of the first human to ever hold a command position in their military. The chamber itself was a marvel of imperial engineering, carved from a single massive crystal that amplified sound and projected the proceedings to billions across the galaxy. Representatives from hundreds of worlds watched as the Zephyrian Tribunal prepared to make an example of humanity's defiance. Admiral Sarah Martinez stood in the command center of Luna Base, watching as the largest military mobilization in human history unfolded before her eyes. Through the massive viewport, she could see hundreds of ships gathering in Earth's orbital space, not just military vessels, but converted cargo haulers, mining ships, and even luxury liners that had been hastily retrofitted with weapons. It had been 6 weeks since Marcus Chen's execution, and the Empire was beginning to understand the magnitude of their mistake. What they had expected to be a simple demonstration of power had triggered something unprecedented in galactic history: the complete withdrawal of an entire species from Imperial service. "Status report," Martinez commanded, her voice carrying the authority that had made her the youngest admiral in human history. Commander Jackson stepped forward with a datapad. "All human personnel have been extracted from Imperial space. Final count, 2.3 million military personnel, 8.7 million civilian contractors, and roughly 45 million colonists who chose to evacuate rather than remain under Imperial rule." The numbers were staggering. Humans had been involved in virtually every aspect of Imperial operations, from the engineers who maintained their ships to the doctors who treated their wounded. The sudden absence of human expertise was already causing chaos throughout the Empire's vast bureaucracy. But Martinez wasn't interested in the Empire's administrative problems. She was focused on something far more important: the intelligence network that Marcus had built during his years of service. The executed general had been more than just a brilliant tactician. He had been a spy master who understood that a war with the Empire was inevitable. "What about Chen's protocols?" she asked. "Fully activated," replied Dr. Elena Vasquez, the head of human intelligence. "Every sleeper agent is in position. We have assets in the Imperial Senate, their military command structure, and most importantly, their research divisions. They never suspected that their loyal human employees were gathering intelligence on their most classified projects. Marcus had spent years building this network, recruiting humans who shared his vision of eventual independence. They had posed as grateful subjects while systematically learning everything there was to know about Imperial technology, tactics, and weaknesses. Now that knowledge would be put to use. The transformation of human space was remarkable to witness. Worlds that had been peaceful colonies just weeks before were now bustling military-industrial complexes. The mining operations that had supplied the Empire with raw materials were now producing armor and ammunition. The research stations that had developed Imperial technologies were now creating weapons specifically designed to counter alien advantages. On Mars, the old terraforming equipment had been converted into massive weapons factories. The orbital shipyards around Jupiter were working around the clock, producing vessels based on stolen Imperial designs, but improved with human innovation. Most importantly, the defensive platforms that had once protected human worlds from pirates were being upgraded with technology that the Empire didn't even know existed. This last point was crucial. The Empire had always underestimated human technological development, assuming that their young civilization couldn't possibly improve upon designs that were thousands of years old. They were about to discover just how wrong they had been. Captain Lisa Park entered the command center, carrying a sealed case that made Martinez smile for the first time in weeks. "The prototypes are ready for testing," Park announced. "Project Prometheus is fully operational." Project Prometheus had been Marcus Chen's greatest secret, a weapons development program that had been hidden from Imperial oversight for over a decade. Using a combination of stolen alien technology and uniquely human innovations, human scientists had created weapons that could level the playing field against the Empire's vast numerical advantage. "Show me," Martinez ordered. Park opened the case to reveal what looked like a standard Imperial pulse rifle, but Martinez could see the subtle differences that marked it as something entirely new. "We call it the Equalizer," Park explained. "It uses Imperial energy technology, but we've increased the power output by 400% and added a targeting system that can track multiple alien physiologies simultaneously." But the small arms were just the beginning. The real surprise was what human engineers had done with Imperial ship designs. By studying captured vessels and reverse engineering their technology, humanity had developed improvements that the Empire had never considered possible. "The new destroyers are ready for combat trials," reported Admiral Chen, Marcus's younger brother who had taken leave from the Imperial Navy after the execution. "We've increased their speed by 60%, improved their armor efficiency, and installed weapons that can punch through Imperial shields like they're made of paper." The secret was human adaptability. Where alien species had perfected their technologies over millennia and then stopped innovating, humans constantly sought ways to improve and modify existing designs. What the Empire saw as perfection, humans saw as a starting point. Meanwhile, across Imperial space, the first signs of real trouble were beginning to emerge. Supply lines that had depended on human-operated ships were breaking down. Military bases that had relied on human technicians were experiencing mysterious equipment failures. Most concerning of all, several Imperial research facilities had suffered catastrophic accidents that destroyed years of classified work. The Empire's response was predictably heavy-handed. They began arresting any remaining humans in Imperial space, convinced that they were dealing with a terrorist network rather than a coordinated military withdrawal. This only accelerated the exodus and provided Martinez with a steady stream of refugees who brought valuable intelligence with them. But the Empire's greatest mistake was underestimating the depth of human preparation. They assumed that humanity's sudden defiance was an emotional reaction to Marcus's execution. They failed to understand that this had been planned for decades, that Marcus Chen had died not as a victim, but as a catalyst for a revolution that was already in motion. The proof came when Imperial forces attempted to blockade the Sol system, expecting to find a disorganized collection of civilian ships fleeing in panic. Instead, they encountered the most sophisticated defensive network ever constructed, featuring weapons and tactics that their own military manuals said were impossible. Admiral Zexhai, commanding the Imperial blockade fleet, watched in disbelief as human vessels appeared to ignore the laws of physics, executing maneuvers that should have torn their ships apart. Their weapons struck with precision that exceeded Imperial computer targeting, and their defensive systems seemed to anticipate every attack before it was launched. "How is this possible?" he demanded of his tactical officer. "These are primitives who only achieved spaceflight 50 years ago." But on the bridge of the human flagship Defiance, Admiral Martinez smiled as she watched the Imperial fleet struggling to comprehend what they were facing. The aliens had made the classic mistake of confusing technological maturity with technological superiority. They had perfected their weapons and tactics millennia ago, but perfection was the enemy of innovation. Humans, on the other hand, had spent 50 years studying Imperial technology with the fresh eyes of newcomers. They had identified weaknesses that the Empire had forgotten existed, found improvements that centuries of tradition had overlooked, and developed countermeasures that no one had thought necessary. The blockade of Sol lasted exactly 17 hours. When it was over, Admiral Zexhai was dead, his fleet was scattered, and the Empire finally understood that they were not dealing with a rebellion, They were facing the birth of a rival civilization that had been preparing for this moment since the day they first encountered imperial arrogance. The execution of Marcus Chen had been intended to demonstrate imperial power. Instead, it had revealed imperial weakness and given humanity the justification they needed to step out of the Empire's shadow forever. The real war was just beginning, and the Empire was about to learn that sometimes the student surpasses the teacher in ways that no one saw coming. The Imperial Senate had never seen chaos like this. Emergency sessions were being called every few hours as reports flooded in from across the galaxy. Human forces were striking everywhere at once, hitting targets that should have been impossible to locate, using tactics that defied every military manual in Imperial history. High Magistrate Veltar, the same official who had overseen Marcus Chen's execution, stood before the assembled senators with news that bordered on the impossible. "In the past 3 months," he announced, his voice trembling with barely contained panic, "we have lost 17 core worlds, 43 military installations, and over 60% of our long-range communication network. The humans are not simply rebelling. They are systematically dismantling our empire." The transformation of humanity's military capabilities had been breathtaking to observe. What had begun as a collection of converted civilian ships and angry refugees had evolved into the most effective fighting force the galaxy had ever seen. The secret lay not just in their technology, but in their fundamentally different approach to warfare. Where imperial doctrine emphasized overwhelming force and rigid formations, human tactics were fluid and unpredictable. Their commanders made decisions in minutes that would take imperial councils hours to debate. Their soldiers showed initiative that imperial training actively discouraged. Most remarkably, they seemed to treat every engagement as a learning experience, constantly adapting and improving their methods. Admiral Sarah Martinez stood on the bridge of the newly commissioned dreadnought Vengeance, watching as her fleet prepared for what intelligence suggested would be the decisive battle of the war. The Imperial Navy was massing its entire remaining strength for one final push to destroy humanity before their rebellion could spread to other species. "Sensor contacts," reported Lieutenant Commander Park. "Imperial Grand Fleet is entering the system. Count shows." "My God, Admiral. They brought everything they had left. Over 3,000 ships." Martinez nodded calmly. The Empire was fielding 10 times more ships than humanity possessed. But she had learned from Marcus Chen that numbers alone did not determine victory. The executed general had taught them that warfare was about psychology as much as firepower, about understanding your enemy's weaknesses better than they understood them themselves. "Signal the fleet," she ordered. "Begin implementation of Protocol 7. Protocol 7 had been Marcus's masterpiece, a tactical doctrine that turned humanity's smaller numbers into an advantage by forcing the enemy to fight on multiple fronts simultaneously. Human ships would strike quickly and fade away, appearing where the Empire least expected them, hitting targets that seemed impossible to reach. But the real genius of human strategy lay deeper than tactics. While the Empire focused on military objectives, humanity had been targeting something far more vulnerable: the Empire's confidence in its own superiority. Every human victory, no matter how small, sent a message to the dozens of subject species that had accepted imperial rule for millennia. Resistance was possible. The battle that followed would be remembered as the moment when the old galactic order finally collapsed. Imperial ships, massive and powerful, but designed for set-piece battles against conventional enemies, found themselves unable to engage an enemy that refused to fight conventionally. Human vessels darted between the Imperial formation like angry wasps, striking vital systems and disappearing before return fire could be coordinated. But the true horror for the Empire came when they realized that their own technology was being used against them. Human scientists had not just copied Imperial designs, They had improved upon them, creating weapons that could penetrate Imperial armor, shields that could deflect Imperial energy weapons, and engines that could outmaneuver ships 3 times their size. "How is this possible?" Admiral Korthvel demanded as he watched his flagship's shields fail under assault from weapons that his sensors insisted were firing Imperial energy signatures. "These are our own designs." His tactical officer, a veteran of 100 Imperial victories, could only shake his head in confusion. "Sir, they appear to have modified our technology in ways we never considered. Their targeting computers are predicting our movements before we make them. Their weapons are somehow more efficient than ours, despite using the same basic principles." The answer was uniquely human. They had taken Imperial technology and subjected it to the kind of relentless optimization that had characterized human development since they first picked up tools. Every system had been analyzed, tested, and improved upon. Every weakness had been identified and corrected. The Empire's perfect designs had been made better through the application of humanity's greatest strength, the refusal to accept that anything could not be improved. As the battle raged, another front was opening that the Empire had never anticipated. On dozens of worlds, subject species that had watched humanity's defiance with growing interest began to stir. The Kelhari, enslaved for their technical expertise, began sabotaging Imperial installations. The Threks, whose warrior culture had been suppressed for generations, started raiding Imperial supply convoys. The Mendari, forced to serve as laborers, began industrial strikes that paralyzed entire systems. The revolution that Marcus Chen had ignited was spreading beyond humanity. For the first time in 1,000 years, the Empire faced coordinated resistance from multiple species simultaneously. The message was clear. The age of unquestioned Imperial dominance was over. Back in the battle, Admiral Martinez watched as the Imperial formation began to collapse under the psychological pressure of fighting an enemy they couldn't understand. Imperial commanders, trained in rigid doctrine, were making increasingly desperate decisions as their carefully planned tactics fell apart. "Admiral Korthvel is signaling," reported the communications officer. "He's requesting terms for surrender." The bridge fell silent. In the entire recorded history of the Empire, no Imperial admiral had ever surrendered to what they considered a lesser species. The psychological victory was complete. Humanity had not just defeated the Imperial Navy, they had broken the will that had held the Empire together for millennia. Martinez considered the request carefully. Marcus Chen had died because the Empire believed it could crush human spirit through violence. Now she had the opportunity to show them that humanity's true strength lay not in vengeance, but in the vision of something better. "Open a channel," she ordered. "Admiral Korthvel, this is Admiral Martinez. We accept your surrender, but not your submission. The age of empire is over. What comes next will be built on cooperation, not conquest. Join us and help us build something worthy of the stars." The Imperial response came not just from Korthvel, but from ship after ship throughout the fleet. One by one, Imperial vessels began powering down their weapons and signaling their acceptance of humanity's terms. The Great War was ending not with destruction, but with the birth of something unprecedented, a galactic alliance based on equality rather than domination. On Earth, in the memorial garden where Marcus Chen's name had been carved alongside humanity's greatest heroes, Admiral Martinez stood before a gathering of beings from dozens of worlds. Former Imperial subjects, human colonists, even reformed Imperial officers had come together to witness the signing of the Galactic Cooperation Accords. General Chen died believing that all species deserved the right to determine their own destiny, Martinez said as she prepared to sign the document that would reshape galactic civilization. Today we honor his sacrifice not with vengeance, but with the promise that no being will ever again be executed for the crime of thinking freely. The empire that had ruled through fear and tradition was gone. replaced by an alliance that valued innovation and independence. The execution that was meant to terrify humanity into submission had instead awakened a sleeping giant that would never again accept the role of grateful subject. Marcus Chen had died as he lived, fighting for the principle that intelligence and determination could overcome any obstacle. His death had sparked not just a war, but a renaissance that would carry the galaxy into an age of possibilities that the old empire could never have imagined. The general was gone, but his legacy would endure in every free world that chose cooperation over conquest, innovation over tradition, and hope over fear. Marcus had been captured 3 months ago during the Battle of Kepler 442b, where his unconventional tactics had nearly broken a siege that should have lasted years. Instead of following standard Imperial doctrine, he had used what the aliens called primitive human intuition to outmaneuver forces 3 times his size. For this crime of thinking differently, the Empire had branded him a war criminal. "Human designation Marcus Chen," announced High Magistrate Veltar, his 6 eyes gleaming with satisfaction. "You stand accused of violating the sacred protocols of warfare, endangering Imperial forces through reckless tactics, and spreading the disease of human unpredictability among our ranks. How do you answer?" Marcus lifted his chin, meeting the alien's gaze without flinching. "I answer that I saved 12 million lives on that planet. Your sacred protocols would have turned it into a graveyard." A ripple of shock ran through the assembled delegates. No condemned being had ever spoken back to the tribunal. Veltar's mandibles clicked in annoyance. "Your species' arrogance knows no bounds. This is precisely why humanity must be contained, why your influence must be purged from our military." The truth was more complex than the Empire wanted to admit. Humans had joined the galactic community only 50 years ago, a young species barely past nuclear weapons when first contact was made. The Empire had expected them to be grateful subjects, content to serve in minor roles while the established races maintained control. Instead, humans had proven impossibly adaptable. They learned alien languages in months rather than decades. They absorbed technologies and improved upon them with frightening speed. Worst of all, they questioned everything: ancient tactics, established hierarchies, the very foundations of imperial order. Marcus represented everything the Empire feared about humanity. Born on Earth's first colony world, he had enlisted in the Imperial Navy at 18 and risen through the ranks with unprecedented speed. His success wasn't due to political connections or ancient bloodlines like other Imperial officers. He succeeded because he was simply better at the job than anyone else. "The tribunal finds you guilty on all charges," Veltar continued. "You will be executed by neural disintegration, and your death will serve as a warning to all humans who think to challenge the natural order." "Natural order?" Marcus laughed, the sound echoing strangely in the crystal chamber. "There's nothing natural about an empire that's been stagnant for 1,000 years. You're so afraid of change that you execute anyone who shows you a better way." The executioner, a towering Kralvan warrior in ceremonial armor, stepped forward. His species had served the Empire as enforcers for millennia, their natural aggression channeled into maintaining order. The neural disintegrator in his massive hands could erase a person's consciousness while leaving their body alive as a warning. "Any final words, human?" the executioner asked, his voice a deep rumble. Marcus looked directly into the primary broadcast camera. He knew his words would reach every corner of human space, every colony world, every ship in the fleet. "Tell Earth that Marcus Chen died free. Tell them that the Empire fears us because they know we're better than they are. And tell them that this isn't over." The disintegrator hummed to life, energy coils glowing with lethal power. In the viewing areas, alien dignitaries leaned forward in anticipation. They had come to see the Empire's strength displayed. to watch as human defiance was finally crushed. But on distant Earth, in the halls of the Human Defense Council, Marcus's words were being received very differently. Admiral Sarah Martinez, the highest-ranking human in the Imperial Navy, watched the execution with cold fury. Around her, other human officers stood in stunned silence as their most successful general died for the crime of being too effective. "Ma'am," whispered Commander Jackson, his voice barely audible. "What are we going to do?" Admiral Martinez never took her eyes off the screen as the disintegrator fired, erasing Marcus Chen from existence. "We're going to show them exactly why they should have feared us," she said quietly. "Send the recall order. Every human ship. Every human officer. We're going home." The execution was broadcast as planned, intended to demonstrate Imperial might. But as the transmission ended and the chamber fell silent, Veltar felt an unexpected chill. In the back of his mind, a small voice whispered that perhaps they had made a terrible mistake. 3 days later, the first human ship failed to report for duty. Within a week, entire human crews were requesting transfers back to Earth space. By the end of the month, a mass exodus was underway that would leave the Imperial Navy critically understaffed. But this was only the beginning. On Earth, Admiral Martinez was making calls to contacts throughout the galaxy, arms dealers, mercenary groups, independent contractors who owed favors to human officers. She was also reviewing files that Marcus Chen had compiled over his years of service, detailed intelligence on Imperial weaknesses that he had gathered while pretending to be a loyal officer. The Empire had thought they were executing one troublesome human. They had no idea they had just declared war on a species that had been planning for this moment since the day they first encountered Imperial arrogance. Marcus Chen had died as he planned to, as the spark that would ignite humanity's true war for independence. In the depths of space, human merchant vessels were quietly changing course, their cargo holds filled with more than trade goods. On remote mining worlds, human colonists were suddenly developing an unusual interest in chemistry and engineering, and in the hidden shipyards beyond Imperial space, construction had begun on vessels that would have terrified the Tribunal if they had known such things were possible. The Empire had executed one human general. They were about to discover that they had created an entire nation of warriors. Marcus Chen was dead, but his legacy was just beginning. The real war was coming, and when it arrived, the galaxy would learn exactly why humanity had earned a place among the stars, not through submission, but through the kind of relentless determination that turned death into victory and martyrdom into revolution. The crystal chamber had fallen silent, but across human space the sound of war drums was beginning to echo.